in their rotation. I think with Tyreek Evans struggling, if he continues to struggle all the way up until that trade deadline, it's I don't know if they'd move him, but it's kind of hard to envision them kind of sticking with what they've got, because the whole premise of their free agency class last summer was that Tyreek Evans was going to be the secondary playmaker that they needed, and he'll be big come playoff time because he can keep defenses honest against Oladipo whenever teams are playing a playoff style defense, which has not been the case at all. He hasn't played much with Oladipo, relatively speaking, and I think he's only played like 1 minute in clutch situations, which is classified as when the game is has 5 minutes or less remaining and the score is 5 points or less in scoring differential. So that's definitely not been the case with what they were saying that they were acquiring this summer.
We're talking with Grant Ostiff, a student at Arizona State University, columnist for the Kokomo Tribune and Indy Sports coverage, talking about the Indiana Pacers. Joining us now is Mo from the BS Sports Show. Mo, we're talking a little bit of NBA and the Pacers. We may have some time with you to get a little bit into the NFL playoffs this weekend picture. But as we look at the Pacers and we look at the where they're at a 21-12, obviously great win over the Nets, snapping their 7-game winning streak. We're talking about Grant was just talking with us a little bit about the new Miles Turner as opposed to the old Miles Turner, and certainly Victor Oladipo and coming up on the trade deadline. I know you were hearing a little bit of that conversation, but what say you, sir?
Well, I think the Pacers obviously need to get better at closing out games. We saw them take a few losses here this past week that should have been wins. The missed foul call against Toronto, but I think the way that they just kind of fell apart at the end against Cleveland was something that a good playoff basketball team shouldn't do. Victor Oladipo missing some key free throws at the end of that game. It's a team that it feels at time, it lacks that second star to complement Victor Oladipo. I know Grant talked about, Tyreek Evans struggling, and that's one of the things that he was picked up for. So it really feels like there really needs to be that second option that is scary to people that's not Victor. So I think that's one thing that hopefully the Pacers can figure out how to acquire either now or in the offseason.
Grant, the Pacers are 3.5 games back from the lead of the Toronto Raptors. Obviously, we had the Toronto Raptors this week. The Bucks are only the Milwaukee Bucks are only a game and a half behind. The Pacers are at a good, solid number 3 position, but tied with 3.5 games behind the 76ers. As we walk around the NBA and the standings, what are your thoughts on the Pacers being number 3 in the East?
I think at the current moment, I think that's probably an ideal spot where they should be shooting for, because the East is practically a 5-team conference in terms of having teams that are legitimately capable of having postseason success. So I think right now they're tied with the Philadelphia 76ers, have the exact same record. I think it's pivotal that they hold on to that third spot come by the end of the season. I think something that's been kind of surprising is the Boston Celtics have not been nearly as good as what many thought they would be, including myself. And it doesn't look like that's going to be changing, relatively soon either. So I think they're probably looking at a top 4 seed, and I think the 3 spot's something they definitely need to be shooting for.
Mo, let's talk a little bit about the West. And the Nuggets are surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, number 1, followed by the Thunder and the Warriors. Both of those tied at 1 game back at 3 games. Obviously, we're used to seeing the Warriors in the number 1 slot. The Denver Nuggets in the number 1 slot seems kind of foreign.
Yeah, I think that Denver has kind of shocked everybody this year with their play, but they've drafted well, they've signed well, done well in the offseason. And the Warriors have had some drama with their basketball team this year, and but after seeing some film of Boogie Cousins in practice, when he returns to that, when he comes into that lineup after the first of the year or after the All-Star break, wherever he's shooting for, that's going to be one scary lineup in the West. So, Yeah, I mean, Denver being there is great. Is it something they can sustain? I think is what you look at when a team is surprising in the first half. Is it success they can sustain throughout the whole season? And that's what will be interesting to see.
Let's get into some college hoopage. Obviously, you can't have the NBA without college hoops. This is the time of year we kind of start shifting gears to college. We'll start with you, Grant. Let's just indulge in that huge victory Indiana had over Butler. We saw Romeo Langford, but at the same time, we saw a rather weaker Indiana team beat a rather weaker team. What can we read into the tea leaves of the Crossroads Classics, and then also Notre Dame beating Purdue? I don't know which was the more polished turd in that game, but what an historic, great win it was for Indiana University to beat Butler at the buzzer. What are your thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I think the number one thought is that I love the whole setup for the Crossroads Classic. I think I think it served exactly what you would want it to serve with IU having won a memorable moment at the buzzer against Butler. And, I think the number one thing about IU so far has been, they've had a pretty strong start to the season, but they're letting teams, before their last few blowout wins after the Crossroads Classic, like against more talented teams, they've let them take them, down to the wire, and they're going to have to, they're going to have to be more impactful throughout the earlier parts of the game and not get down, again, when they start Big Ten play. And I think another thing too is that they need to improve their transition offense. Romeo Langford has been effective in a lot of areas, but he's been very ineffective in transition, and that's translated to the team's success as well.
Mo, do we still think that Romeo Langford's a one and done? Mo, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
There he is. Okay, yeah, I can hear you now. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think if he could leave now and go to the NBA, I think he would. There's times that he looks completely disinterested in what's going on in the floor with some of these lesser teams that they play. I think for IU, the big thing is cutting down on their turnovers. They've amassed a ton of turnovers in a few games, and then some poor free throw shooting we've seen has hurt them in games down the stretch. We saw it in the loss to Arkansas. So, I think keeping Romeo Langford engaged will be something that Archie Miller's got to do. But, getting this team overall to cut down, like Grant said in the transition, they turn the ball over a lot. So you cut down on turnovers, and then definitely when they're making it to the line, hitting those free throws.
Let's talk a little bit just about teams in general. We were talking earlier on in the show about how good Duke is and how Kentucky has kind of fallen down the slopes, if you will, in the rankings. And it seems like, because we were talking about these one and dones and about rolling your dice in the one and dones. Grant, let's start with you. Obviously, when we look at some of the top schools right now, Duke is one of them that comes to mind, obviously. But Kansas is number one, Duke, Tennessee, number three, Michigan, number four, and Virginia, number five. What are your thoughts as we begin to look at these teams? And Kentucky just seems like it's going in the opposite direction. I mean, I know I'm an IU homer, and I'm not a big Kentucky fan, but that said, it just seems like that Kentucky has rolled their dice on these one and dones and these big players, as opposed to actually building a program, and now it's coming back to bite them.
Yeah, I think the number one thing is that Duke's hoarding a lot of talent right now, and it's difficult to be able to to overcome one team getting three likely top 10 picks, with one of them likely being the top pick in the upcoming NBA draft. I think. I just don't think I think it's one of those reloading years for Kentucky for sure. I think when you don't build up a program with veterans, I think you can have years like this, and I think not getting some of the top talent has probably been that main cause.
Mo, let's talk a little bit about James Wiseman. Obviously, one of the country's top recruits in the class of 2019, announced his commitment to Memphis in November by unveiling a unicorn-shaped, adored Tiger. Obviously, this is a future NBA lottery pick. Is he a one-and-done, big 7-footer? And obviously says something for Memphis and their ability to recruit top recruits. And do we lose you again, Mo? Earth calling Mo again. Mo.
Hello.
Can you hear us? We can hear you now. Sir.
Yeah.
Stop playing with that mute.
I couldn't hear you at all. So, no, I couldn't hear you at all. I'm not sure what you asked me. If you asked me anything.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, I was just asking you about just top college recruits. And I lost. I was talking about James Wiseman, who's one of the top recruits that committed to Memphis, and he's a NBA lottery pick for sure, big 7-footer. What are your thoughts about how good of a recruit is James Wiseman, and what does it show that Memphis is able to recruit good recruits?
Well, I think one thing it shows is the power of a guy like Penny Hardaway, who's obviously a great player that a lot of people, that remember, but, he's also a guy who's passionate. If you watch him in his press conference after playing Tennessee, he's a guy that definitely, I think, has helped put that basketball team back on the map. As far as Wiseman goes, it's hard to tell exactly how great a guy like that's going to be, especially when you're a guy that big who's having a hard time getting some pub because of a guy like Zion Williamson. So I think, unfortunately for him, he's been overshadowed a little bit by Zion, but as far as the recruiting goes and what it says for Memphis, I think, Penny Hardaway coming in the living room, if it's not somebody that the kids watch, obviously somebody that the parents watch, and I think that's a big deal when you've got a personality like Penny Hardaway that comes in your living room when you're trying to recruit kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I thought you were going to say something else there. Well, we're going to move on to just a couple more minutes here, and because the Colts play tomorrow, they play the Giants. They're still in the playoff picture. Grant, what are your thoughts about the Indianapolis Colts getting into the playoffs? Does it happen? Does it not happen? What are your thoughts about Frank Reich, Andrew Luck? What say you?
Well, I think they will get it barely. I think I feel like they'll win their last 2 games. And I feel like some dominoes will fall in their favor to get that final wild card spot. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't, though, because other teams taking care of their own business prevents their own path to the wild card. So I think Frank Reich's doing a really, really good job. I think it's pretty great to see the type of offense that he designs, as opposed to a Chuck Pagano offense. And I think, adding more pieces to that team in dynamic talent, especially at the receiver position, they can be something pretty special, in these coming years.
Mo, what are we looking for tomorrow with the Colts? And, of course, today the Washington Redskins and the Titans and the Ravens and the Chargers. Go Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the Chargers do pick up a big win today against Baltimore. For me, I think for the Colts, it's going to be interesting to see what tactic that Chris Ballard takes in the offseason, whether the Colts make the playoffs or not. There was a report yesterday out of New York that, Le'Veon Bell prefers going to the Colts. The Colts have never really, targeted big-time free agents like that, big money free agents like that. So it'll be interesting to see what pieces Chris Ballard does add and how he adds them. He's done well at adding pieces from the draft. Would the Colts consider a guy like Le'Veon Bell, A, with his track record, and B, with the kind of price tag it would bring, especially, they have the most salary cap in the NFL to use, but is that the way that Chris Ballard's going to go? So I think that's the interesting parts will be the offseason. I hope the Colts make the playoffs. It'll be fun to see them wreck a few teams' hopes in the playoffs. I think they're a very good football team, and I think they have a chance to be a great football team, which is, shocking, thinking that we were unsure at the beginning of the year after the Colts started 1-5 what this football team's future was. So I think Frank Reich has done a phenomenal job. I think that this offensive line has been great. There's been impressive young guys on defense, obviously. It's a fun football team to watch again, and I think they're on the edge of being great, depending on which way Chris Ballard wants to go and how he builds his football team.
All right, guys, we've got to wrap it up and put a bow on it. Grant, where can people find your work and your masterpieces, sir?
You can find my Pacers coverage at indianasportscoverage.com, as well as the Kokomo Tribune. I write a weekly column for them.
Well, we look forward to doing that, and thank you, Grant. You guys have a Merry Christmas.